you're all here for the book, Religious Right, The Greatest Threat to Democracy. If not, it's going to be quite a shock for you. And first of all, I want to open with a huge thank you to the Hooked on Books folks. These guys, they were even brave enough to hang the poster advertising the book and today in their window. So, very brave people. We appreciate it. And if you're not familiar with Hooked on Books, please take a look around while you're here. These guys are great, and this has been a bit around. This is practically an institution in this town, so it's a wonderful place for book lovers.
Thank you.
And I want to say thank you to a few people. They're not here, but it's in my foreword to the book. Thank you for the interviews that I got. C.J. Pascoe, who's a professor at Colorado College, interview with a former Quiverfull member named Vicki Garrison. She was wonderful giving me her interview, and grateful to my test readers. 2 of them are here who read it in its rough form and gave me inputs. Thank you guys, thank you. And also my editor, Casey Arno, who was in Virginia, who tackled this and helped me edit it and polish it. I'm sorry? Arsenault, sorry.
That's Cajun.
Oh, it's Cajun, all right. And then I also want to thank the artist who did this absolutely stunning painting. This is actually a painting.
Oh my God.
His name is Rainier Kalwitz, and I found this on DeviantArt and contacted him, and he sold me limited rights to use this for the book. So he is a professional artist, and so I'm very grateful for him for the use of his artwork, and the title of it is Miss Lady Liberty Decaying. So, and of course, thank you to my spouse who put up with 4 years of, I'm working on my book! All right. This morning, I was very, very pleased to receive my first official endorsement from somebody. This is a gentleman who I actually quote from in the book. His name is Jason Childs. He's the founder of the Center for Progress in Alabama. He was a Liberty University graduate, so he was one of the people that we talk about. And he's a former evangelical Baptist pastor, and he wrote, "Every freedom-loving American should read this book. A.F. Alexander lays out the facts as only an insider could, and they are startling. Christian Dominionism represents a clear and present danger to our democracy, and this book tells you what each of us can do to protect the liberty we all hold so dear."
Wow.
So I'm very grateful for that first endorsement. And he is one of the people who's coming out and as a former religious writer and who is proclaiming the dangers of what's really going on. So I appreciate that endorsement from him. He found me on my Facebook page for the book. So I want to talk just a little bit, and yeah, I have several pages of notes, so don't let that scare you. I want to share a little bit without giving away, the book itself. So I'm going to talk about a few things that aren't included in the book, and hopefully that's a teaser to entice people who haven't read the book to get it, to buy it, to devour it, and to comment on Amazon and Barnes & Noble about how wonderful it is. And, and those of you who have already read it can stick around because we'll be doing little video testimonials afterwards. So, first I want to open with a question. How many of you have heard the political news commentators out today say, but it makes no political sense? What we're seeing, the war on women, all of these things that are going on around us, all the legislation, but it makes no political sense, the commentators are saying. In reference to stands that the GOP has taken, I mean, birth control under attack, all of these things, it makes no political sense. Well, that's because it's not a political strategy. It's an agenda. And that's what they don't get, and that's what the book goes into. This is not a political strategy, it is an agenda. It's an agenda that has been decades in the making. And what is the religious right? Most people, that's a real head scratcher because that's kind of been nebulous. I define it as, it's an extremist, form of Christianity which desires to replace democracy, the idea of the people, by the people, and for the people, to be of God, for God, and by God in every aspect of life. Think of them as the Pharisees of our day. They are power hungry and they want control. And I have, I don't know if many of you have gotten a chance to even look at the bibliography. I didn't want this to be just, I'm saying, this is my opinion. So the bibliography is just listing the books, and there are over 60 books. There's almost 4 pages of the bibliography, and that's not counting the articles as well, by professors, respected people in their fields, former religious writers and pastors that have come out that are sharing what is going on behind the scenes, the truth of it all. And, yeah. Now, another question would be, well, how is this different than Christianity? What is it that is the core issue of the religious right that makes this different than just your run-of-your-mill church, pew sitter? Well, the answer is, it's called Dominion and Reconstructionism. It's reconstruction of the U.S. to be a Christian nation from the government laws being based on the Old Testament Bible and areas of culture glorifying a very narrow vision of God. Their idea is dominion of the entire nation, every aspect of the nation, the culture, and Reconstruction is reconstructing the government and so forth to be based on the Bible. So I want to start with that whole idea of Dominionism and Reconstructionism, because this is the core thing. This is what really makes the religious right who it is and makes it an issue for our liberty, our rights. It provides the current motivation and drive behind what we are seeing today. That idea that it's not a political strategy, that this is an agenda, comes from this Dominionism and Reconstructionism. And for that, we must look to the man who is credited with essentially founding Christian Reconstructionism. Does anyone have any clue who that might be? Anybody read Republican Gomorrah? He was brought up in Republican Gomorrah. Max Blumenthal spoke about him. His name is Rusa John Rushdoony, also R.J. Rushdoony. Yeah. He was born in New York City, the son of recently arrived Armenian immigrants. He received a public school education, which he would later try to completely denounce anything of public schools as being evil, but that's how he got his education. And he died just this last 2001. He was married twice. He was an ordained Presbyterian in the church, ordained by the Presbyterian Church in the United States. Rushdoony then served for 8.5 years as a missionary to the Shoshone and Paiute Indians. And in the 60s, he was active in the homeschool movement. He is credited with essentially getting the laws that allow for homeschooling, allowing for no real accreditation of homeschooling, and busting that wide open. He's credited with spearheading that whole push. His daughter Sharon married a man named Gary North, who I don't know if any of you are familiar with. Gary North, if you were lucky enough to see a clip of Rand Paul on the steps of the Federal Reserve when he was campaigning for his seat, behind him was a sign that was the name of one of Gary North's book about the gold standard, about going to the gold standard, going back to the gold standard. Gary North is R.J. Rushdoony's son-in-law. And the Constitution Party is actually Christian Reconstructionism. And it's all very incestuous. They're all very connected. So, Rushdoony's only son, the Reverend Mark Rushdoony, is the current president of the Chalcedon Foundation, which Rushdoony founded, and is publishing all kinds of books, continuing this work and so forth. And as far as homeschooling, Rushduni's focus was on education initially, and then he moved to history. He was so successful in just slaughtering public schools and spreading that public schools were an evil that, before it was not government-sponsored, and teaching our children humanism and the God of humanism and all of this, which is what he has put forth, and we've heard from political speakers today. Who heard that in a political speech in the last year against public schools? And Santorum, came out and actually, said, they just indoctrinate, it's socialism. That all comes from Rushduni and his attack on public schools to begin with, saying that people like Horace Mann and those who were the people who really brought a lot of structure to public schooling and the theory and so forth, he attacked them as just, this is humanism taking over your children and indoctrinating them. So he was so successful with that, he moved on to American history. And he essentially decided that American history went back, and he reconstructed American history to be that America was a Christian nation intentionally. From its very founding, it was always and forever intentionally to be Christian, based on, and not just Christian, based on John Calvin, reformer, Calvinistic principles. So he rewrites American history. Today, we see that all over again. I don't know how many of you know the name David Barton. David Barton, the pseudo-historian, who actually has his degree in Christian education, is regurgitating everything that Rushduni said, rewriting American history. So we see this as it's coming forth, and David Barton was instrumental in helping Texas rewrite, or I shouldn't say rewrite, but put in qualifications for their textbooks that a lot more of what we would consider conservatism is in the textbooks, and let's downplay Thomas Jefferson and the separation of church and state and those sort of things, and rewrite our history to where it's exactly what Rushduni was saying. So David Barton is just taking what Rushduni had set forth, and he's writing book after book and taking it even further. And how many of you have heard David Barton on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart? Twice now. Twice now. New York Times covered him as well, and instead of, going into how his history and his version of history has been ripped to shreds by actual, noted historians, they instead talked about how popular he is among the GOP. How much the GOP is turning to him for policy, and Michelle Bachmann wanting him to be the one to teach the Constitution to all of the Tea Party members, the Tea Party caucus, and Mike Huckabee saying how he should. Mike Huckabee actually said every American should be forced at gunpoint to listen to David Barton.
They'd have to do it at gunpoint.
But the fact that this man made it to The Daily Show twice, not just once, but twice, tells you just how mainstream this has become. This is no longer fringe. You can no longer ignore that it's happening because it's right there. It's on our TVs. It's impacting the textbooks and what our children are being taught. That is how influential it has become. And I think it's become that because people don't want to believe that, come on, this sounds so fringe. This is ludicrous. Who could really believe this? Well, you've got a lot of propaganda, people pushing the propaganda. Speaking of propaganda, Mike Huckabee highlighted David Barton as being a champion to fight against humanism in our schools by what he was doing with the textbook standards in Texas, and had his whole audience riled up to support what was happening with the textbooks in Texas. So there's Rushdoony's attack on history and how it has flowed forward. And he further argued the United States Constitution was a secular document only in appearance. It didn't need us to establish Christianity as an official religion, since the states were already Christian establishments. And Rushdoony said he would, he furthered this in his book, This Independent Republic, Studies in the Nature and Meaning of American History, and also the book, The Nature of the American System, where he completely just hammers that this is a Christian nation. It was intentionally a Christian nation. Now, how many of you would think that the Supreme Court would be of the opinion that for separation of church and state and hold up that we're not to be favoring any, the First Amendment and that whole, you would think that the Supreme Court would be for that. But that's one of the main things that they've been after. I detail in the book their attack on the courts. They decided that they were getting killed by court decisions, so we have to raise up lawyers that are going to go in. And there's a book by a man named Frederick Lane that goes into how the church has influenced the court, and now you have a Supreme Court that has a majority that will vote religious right on almost every issue. Because nobody realizes how important those Supreme Court decisions are. It's more than just how they're going to vote on abortion. It's how are they going to interpret our Constitution. And the way that you can tell is those Supreme Court justices will say, it's up to the states. Yeah, sure, the federal government cannot interfere, but each state can have their own official religion and dictate it. Can you imagine just how united our states would be? With Utah being Mormon, Arizona being...
God knows what.
Okay. Christian Reconstructionism is what they say Rushdoony started, and Dominionism grew out of that. There's very little distinction really in that, but Rushdoony's kind of magnum opus was his book that's nearly 2,000 pages called The Institutes of Biblical Law. And this is where he goes into how Old Testament laws are applicable for America today. He includes hangings, executions for blasphemy. I mean, literally, this is
an eye for an eye.
An eye for an eye. And it's not popular. It's not something that's going to sell to the large masses. So it becomes a softer, gentler message when used in everyday, in the pulpit, this is the kinder, gentler conservative. But we've seen it with in our own state capital, as there was a bill for simple testing to allow testing on a pregnant mother to see if a child would be born with AIDS. And we had one of Colorado Springs' representatives stand up to, do we know what his name was? Schulteis. He stood up and quoted Scripture, Leviticus, Old Testament law, that's exactly what this is about, and said that would be allowing sin to continue, because you have to let the consequences of their sin be played out so that they will learn a lesson. So if the child is born with AIDS, that's just too bad. That's their having to learn their lesson, the wages of their sin. They try to make it, more PR, more palatable, but it's coming out. And that's why the war on women suddenly, it feels like it's suddenly. It feels like all of a sudden there are all of these attacks coming towards women. No, they're just finally being very forthright in what their real agenda is. The whole attack on birth control. I mean, we've had a few generations of women grow up with birth control being easily accessible. Who would have thought that that would suddenly be a hot button issue again? Well, it was only 1965 when it became legal, really. And what they forget is the religious right has been working ever since then in what's called, it's now become called Quiverfull. The idea, and they take an Old Testament scripture and they say, blessed is the man whose quiver is full, meaning blessed is the man who has a lot of children. And for those times, that was probably very true. You needed a lot of children, the death rate was high. But they take that to now, and it is called Quiverfull. You're not to have any birth control. That is sin. That is not trusting God. You are to trust God completely and totally for the size of your family. Birth control is evil. Birth control is, and this whole idea that women are to be outside of the home, in the workplace, is against God. They believe that feminism is women being selfish, self-centered, because they already have very clearly delineated what their role in life is, and that's to be having babies and be in the home. They have a role. Anything else is against God. You are fighting against God and your God-given role. And they say this in their literature. John Hicks, I believe is John and Joan Hicks, wrote a book in the 60s about Quiverfull and started making this popular in the homeschool movement with Rushduni. So the woman stays at home and teaches their kids at home, and they propagate the same message over and over again. And now we have colleges who take homeschoolers and bring that forward so that they're trained up. Patrick Henry College has the most interns to our nation's capital, and their entire mission is to raise up a Christian youth that will go into our nation's capital and bring it under God's leadership. That's their whole mission. It's stated clearly. And they already have the most interns of any college in our nation's capital, and people do not realize this. So, anyway, Rushduni, under his system that he prescribed in the Institutes of Biblical Law, has civil crimes that would carry a death sentence would include homosexuality, adultery, incest, I could see that one, lying about one's virginity, witchcraft and idolatry or apostasy, public blasphemy. Don't you ever say GD again. False prophecy. And false prophecy is pretty much anything that isn't in accord with the established Bible. So, in short, he sought to cast a vision for reconstruction of society based on Christian principles. Well, that's nice. It would have stopped there, except for two men, Bill Bright and Lauren Cunningham, of Youth with a Mission and Campus Crusade for Christ, who shortly after that the Institutes of Biblical Law, about 2 years after that was published, these two men came up with what's called the 7 Mountains Mandate. And it is 7 areas of life, of culture, that if you gain influence over these areas, you can take any nation for Christ. And they have it all mapped out. And so let me skip over to those 7 mountains so that I can just name them off for you. Business, government, media, arts and entertainment, education, the family, and religion. If you take over and become the main influencer, or what they call change agent, you can take any nation for Christ. And that is incredibly important. Why would all of this be so important? What would be the driving force that they have to have this dominion over the nation? Well, it all has to do with their theology. Rushdoony was what's called postmillennial. Any of you know what postmillennial means in theological terms? It means Jesus Christ cannot come back, which they're all waiting for. We're all wanting Jesus Christ's second coming. He cannot come back until we create the kingdom of God here on earth. So come hell or high water, literally, we are going to create the kingdom of God right here, right now, so that Christ can come again. And that's what's driving it. And a lot of people who fall into this don't even know that that's driving it. They may not even follow postmillennialism. And an example of that is Tim LaHaye, who wrote the very popular Left Behind series. Any of you you've heard of it? It's even got a video game where you kill the infidels. Tim LaHaye is not postmillennial. In his books, it's not postmillennialism. Yet he falls right in with the religious right in their push to create this dominionism. Now, I want to give you just a few quotes from their own mouths so that you know it's not just me and my interpretation. Here's a quote for you. Christians have an obligation, a mandate, a commission, a holy responsibility to reclaim the land for Jesus Christ, to have dominion in civil structures, just as in every other aspect of life and godliness. World conquest, that's what Christ has commissioned us to accomplish. But it is dominion we are after, not just a voice. It is dominion we are after, not just influence. It is dominion we are after, not just equal time. It is dominion we are after. World conquest, that's what Christ has commissioned us to accomplish. We must win the world with the power of the gospel, and we must never settle for anything less. Thus, Christian politics has as its primary intent the conquest of the land, of men, families, institutions, bureaucracies, courts, and governments for the kingdom of Christ. That is Gary North, Rushdoony's son-in-law, whose sign of his book was behind Rand Paul on the steps of the Federal Reserve. You see how this really is immediate. It's taking place in our politics right now. Gary North is the gold standard hawker. He started out as just a disciple of Rushdoony, but ended up marrying Rushdoony's daughter. And he's the founder of the publishing firm Institute for Christian Economics. Wonder why economics is so, fraught now, because they're even involved in economics, and it's the Austrian School of Economics that Gary North and Rushdoony are pushing, and we can't get anything done around economics in our nation's capital even, because they are pushing this from their mindset. That's what's godly. Now, the Institute for Christian Economics has since transferred its assets to Dominion Educational Ministries, a nonprofit organization that operates Christian daycare centers. Because the children need to be raised up right. Another quote. This is our land, this is our world, this is our heritage, and with God's help we shall reclaim this nation for Jesus Christ, and no power on earth can stop us. This is a man who heads a mega church. Over 20,000 people in its membership. And this is his message to his followers. He has a radio broadcast. He continues, as the vice-regents of God, we are to bring His truth and His will to bear on every sphere of our world and our society. We are to exercise godly dominion and influence over our neighborhoods, our schools, our government, our literature and arts, our sports arenas, our entertainment media, our news media, and our scientific endeavors. In short, over every aspect and institution of human society. Now this is from a Rolling Stone article. That quote. It's out there. It's been out there. But every time journalists bring it up, they get slammed down by, other journalists who disagree, that have been infiltrated, who have gone into journalism to see that the godly aspects are presented. So, one lady named Michelle Goldberg, who's a journalist, very well-respected journalist, wrote a book, Thy Kingdom Coming, the coming Christian nationalism. She wrote an article about how a lot of the politics that we see today is being inspired and motivated by exactly these Dominionists and Christian Reconstructionists, and she got slammed by other journalists that she was being she was being alarmist, oh, that's so, 5 years, 10 years ago, oh, come on, get real, lady. Total pushback when they do try to come out and say, this is what's happening. You have to understand what's taking place. And they get pushed back. Michelle Goldberg is an incredibly well-respected journalist. Chris Hedges wrote a book, and he's gotten a lot of flack for his book, American Fascists, about this exact same thing. There are a lot of them out there. Randall Balmer, who was involved with the main religious right, or main, I should say, conservative Christian magazine, Christianity Today. Any of you heard that? Christianity Today is one of their biggest publications. Randall Balmer was involved with it, and he ended up writing a book, An Evangelical's Lament, saying how very little of what is in the religious right is actually Christian anymore. Very little is actually Christian. And I'll give you an everyday example, and I'm sure this may upset some. Tim Tebow. Oh. The whole idea of Tebowing. No, the whole idea of Tebowing. The whole idea of Tebowing. Oh, we have to, he wants to show his faith. Gee, Christ gave a very clear statement that you are not to be like the Pharisees and pray in public. And yet every single football game. Do you think he needs to read the New Testament again? I mean, they take it, they have their own agenda, and it is an agenda. And there is very little that is Christian. So Randall Balmer and many others that are actually trying to follow their faith, follow, the Christ of the New Testament, look at that, and they feel they don't have a voice because they try to voice, no, what's going on here? That's not Christian. That's not, what would Jesus do? He doesn't care about, and they get smacked down, they get silenced, and just so that, I think it's important to understand just how much Christianity is impacted in all of this. This is not against Christianity. This is actually protecting Christians as well. And that's why one of the 7 mountains is religion. Because they feel that all of those, naysayers who are Christians, that doesn't look good. When you've got others that are, following the Bible and being good and good, faithful pastors out there who disagree with them, that looks bad. So they actually have a program to take over those moderate churches and change them over. And there are 3 books out by pastors who have fought the religious right in their churches. One is called Steeplejacking, How the Christian Right is Hijacking Mainstream Religion by Reverend Dr. John Dorhauer of United Church of Christ, Missouri Mid-South Conference. He blows the lid off of how the religious right has very effective and insidious tactics to take over those churches that aren't in line with the religious right's core tenets or their political agenda. 2 other books expose the underhanded tactics. Hardball on Holy Ground by Stephen Swaker, dated 2005, is a collection of interviews, research, and essays on the effects of the religious right to undermine mainline churches. And also the book United Methodists at Risk, A Wake-Up Call by Leon Howell, details the battle in the Methodist Church between the left and right and issues a challenge to church moderates and liberals to fight or lose their churches. And the whole idea is, as you start to take over the smaller churches And then you get into the leadership of the church and move up in the hierarchy until you're into the head leadership of a given denomination, and then you can start pushing what the doctrine shall be for that whole denomination. So, a once rather liberal, more moderate, or even progressive churches, eventually the entire denomination is going to go religious right. And these pastors, these three pastors, fought it in their churches, fought it, grassroots fight against the religious right, and wrote books to bring it up. And nobody's ever heard of those books. So the 7 mountains are they have very specific agendas for all of them. Education. We have a lady here who's a teacher. I don't know if you weren't a teacher.
No.
And teachers have, especially the whole education. I have 2 chapters that go into the assault on education. Because you have to, grab the young kids and start early. We know, we say all the time, children are our future, don't we? Do you think they don't know that? Do you think they miss that too?
Poster up behind you.
Yeah, I brought this, and this is actually put out by, it's called Americans United for the Separation of Church and State, and it's started by a pastor, Reverend Barry Lynn. And this is one of the posters that they sent out to their followers, to their people on their mailing list, because of all of the programs that they called it a stealth attack in public schools. The programs that go in under, it's a motivational time for the kids. Strength Team, Commandos USA, all of these, it's going to be so motivational and inspire the kids. And at the end, it's a call to Jesus, or we're having a meeting tonight, you can see more of this, and it turns out to be an entire indoctrination trying to get them to come to Christ. And it's very emotional. And one of the interviews in the book is with a sociology professor at Colorado College, and she talks about how this is very dangerous. They know that these teenagers, it's usually teens, sometimes it's even younger. God Camp was, to even 5 years old, trying to indoctrinate kids. But Dr. C.J. Pascoe goes into how manipulative this is, and they know that these are vulnerable people, vulnerable young people. And I have a quote. See, I had this all laid out. Now it's not going as smoothly as. So this is from our very own beloved and revered James Dobson. Children are the prize to the winners in the Second Great Civil War. Those who control what young people are taught and what they experience, what they see, hear, think, and believe will determine the future course for the nation. And he wrote that in 1991. And we're surprised at the attacks on public schools now. It started with Rushduni and continued. So we got homeschooling now. How about the voucher system? Did you know that they speak specifically? I have quotes directly from the religious right on, yes, anything we can do to take the money away from the public schools. Let me see, I think I have one of those. The next several years more, the director of Exodus Mandate says if we could get up to 30% of public school students into homeschooling or private schools, the system would start to unravel and at some point implode and collapse. He says the government would be forced to get the states out of the education business altogether. It would go back to the churches and the families. It's a strategy for the renewal of society. That was an article, Homeschooling Special, Preach Your Children Well, in 2006. Another one of our favorites, I know you all love Jerry Falwell. I hope I will live to see the day when, as in the early days of our country, we won't have any public schools. The churches will have taken them over again, and Christians will be running them. What a happy day that will be. Are you really surprised the public schools are under attack for funding? This has been building for decades. Vouchers take money away from the schools. Homeschooling. A school is paid for each student that they have. How much can our public school system stay open and teaching if they have only a percentage of the students? I'm being told that I'm running long.
It's so interesting. I could listen to it.
Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
Do you subscribe to church and state?
The separation of
Yeah,
church and state.
separation.
Actually, that is the first chapter of the book. That is the critical issue.
Okay.
Is a true separation of church and state, not manipulating it. I'm sorry, I believe that the Catholic Church and their move against the not having to cover birth control is a misuse, that they're completely twisting the separation of church and state. They're saying this is our religious liberty, and yet they're willing to deny the religious liberty of every woman that is under them.
That's right. But I see what's happening in church and state many times. These kids who have been reared in classes for the religious thing, they turn their backs and they report and they do all sorts of things. And now we have a team of attorneys who are going right smack after them, and we've won. Every
Yes.
time that the attorney gets in there, they
Yes,
start to back
it's
down.
wonderful. And actually these guys, the Americans United for Separation of Church and State, they have lawyers that they work with, and they typically like to have local branches, and of course Colorado doesn't have a single one. But that way they can easily find out from people reporting, this church broke, the tax laws and, and is politicking from the pulpit, which is against the IRS tax code. And they can easily report it to these guys, and they will issue legal briefs and bring the lawyers in and so
Yeah,
forth.
and they get hit over the head every time,
Yep.
which I think is just great. That's why I even read the whole thing. And some of these people are just a little bit.
Well,
I think we're going to win. I really do.
it's
Jan.
thank you. Yes. It's all a matter of getting the word out. It's a matter of
Yeah.
getting the word out.
And
Separation of church and state is critical. It's the critical issue.
Right, and there are just more people who are thinkers than we. You may not know many of them, and I may not. I cruise around in a milieu of all sorts of people, and you don't want to offend anybody, but the minute anybody starts on me, or my husband, they have
I'm outspoken.
they have a lecture.
The first thing I tell a person is, hello, I'm an atheist.
It's made us so popular in
Gets rid of
California.
all the...
We've
Well,
talked.
and actually, and that brings up something. We're looking at such a political, hubbub, hullabaloo over, is Obama Christian enough? Is he really Christian? Is Mitt Romney, properly Christian, being Mormon, which. And I don't know if even many of you realize what is behind that. Since I was religious, right, and we were completely indoctrinated about Mormons being a cult, and you watch the movie Godmakers, which is all about Mormonism and how evil they are, and they're such a cult, and this is why a lot of the evangelicals are like, oh, well, I've got Obama, which, I believe isn't Christian enough for Christian, or I've got, what I think is a cult. I have been completely indoctrinated into Mormonism as a cult. Well, what about can you imagine if we had the most clearly viable candidate being an atheist?
They are, supposedly, an atheist is not allowed to be president, but that is not true.
Actually,
There shall be no test for.
yes, that is in our U.S.
Yeah.
Constitution. No religious test for anyone holding
there you go.
office, and yet we have lots of states who have on their in their state constitutions that you must be a Christian to even run for office.
Yeah, but that's against.
Yeah, but tell them that.
Yeah.
States' rights over federal. That's why there is such a huge push for the states' rights versus, the primacy of the federal law.
Constitution.
Yeah.
I think they're going to lose the women. That's what I think. I know more
Well,
women who are men.
I started asking when the whole issue came out about birth control with the Catholic Church. I contacted several of my Catholic friends and asked them, so, how do you feel about what's going on with the Catholic Church and this whole, ruckus over, and except for two, I should say, all of them gave the party line, oh, well, it's a violation of the Catholic Church's religious liberty. Although I did use birth control. They don't see, and that's part of the problem. They believe that spin that has been given, that the church's right is more important than the individual woman's religious and freedom and so forth to decide for herself.
But it's always been that way. I know in my grandparents' day, they had been very close friends who were Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
They had to pay the priest off so they could use birth control. So you see.
How much was that?
Just
God, I just went ahead and did it. Pay off any priest.
And actually, all joking aside, the whole Proposition 8 in California, that was very contentious, and there was a lot of money spent on that. Catholic Church spent a lot of money on it, and the Mormon Church spent a lot of money in it. The Mormon Church that was not in California. The Mormon Church right out of Utah. But the interesting thing is there was a documentary made called Proposition 8, the Mormon Proposition, that went into interviewing Mormon couples who their leadership came into their homes, sat down and said, okay, we know your finances and this is how much you will give for this battle. Sign the check here.
They still do it.
Oh, yes. And that's how so much money was raised for the whole Proposition 8 in California. Because it's spiritual blackmail. These people were told that their good standing as a Mormon and their eternal souls were on the line because they are supposed to be doing as the leadership says, and they're saying give money. And some of these couples had to literally empty their college, savings account for their kids to meet what was being told that they had to give. Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to say that these folks are really subversive with the way that they've been instituting a lot of changes. For example, the institution of No Child Left Behind, which they went ahead and voted in and then promptly did not fund,
Yeah.
and basically put the onus on all of our schools to essentially bring the grades up, and the only way they can do it is to teach to the test. So you end up having a whole bunch of functionally illiterate kids who know how to take a test, but don't know anything else.
Well, but more than that, it's not being able to think on your own,
True,
make your own
exactly.
decisions.
And that's what
You
they
believe
disliked.
everything that they tell you, and it makes it life easy.
And they have to do that in order to get their funding. So
Yes, and actually the whole idea in public schools of the kids learning to have critical thinking skills and question. You're presented with something, then how do you investigate it? How do you question? How do you find what is the truth in this situation, or what's the best choice? That has been the biggest thing that they don't like. Schools back before the government, and Department of Education, and all of that, to where there was more standardized, and there was, teachers had to get certifications, and there was standards for what you're going to teach. Before all that, it was essentially seminary for kids. I mean, each little schoolroom may have had several grades being taught in one room, and they oftentimes got taught reading by the Bible and so forth. That's what they want. They're very mad ever since the Department of Education, and there's standardized. Here's what you will learn. You will learn science, and a lot has been brewing ever since the Scopes monkey trials, and the book kind of goes into that, how they resent that. Tony Perkins. How many of you know who Tony Perkins is? Okay, I quote from Tony Perkins' book. And he goes into how we are not going to be, made a spectacle of ever again like the Scopes monkey trial. We will stand up, and we're going to be in their face.
Ralph Reed.
And that was, yes, and Ralph Reed. But Tony Perkins, his book is called Personal Faith, Public Policy, where he has the answer for everything, and it's all his version of Christianity and the Bible.
See, I never understood why it is that teachers have to be certified, but parents who homeschool their kids don't.
They have.
And there's no testing.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. It's and that's Rushdoony. That's what Rushdoony got pushed through.
How is it that their kids can be accredited for any of their learning? So.
And then when those kids do come back into public education, which at some point the parents are going to get tired of. They're tired of messing with their own kids and at home. They send them back to public school, and the kids are lacking the skills.
Yes, they're lacking
and so then they start
a lot of skills.
criticizing the public school because it's too hard. Well, they don't have the skills to return.
Right. Well, and here's another attack from a completely different angle against public schools. How many of you heard about the lawsuit with the Good News Club? Yeah. There's a new book. It just came out in like January or February of a lady who goes into this and investigated it. There was a lawsuit. The Good News Club wanted to use public school facilities to essentially have their church. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and our now, religious right-leaning Supreme Court said, no, those federally funded public schools should be used by churches in their off time. And so what does that create? Yes.
But just to ironically say devil's advocate for a moment,
I knew you would, Hal.
The Lemon case states the 3 specific criteria that must be used to evaluate whether an organization is allowed to use a public school classroom. And they're very clear on that. And they have relatively consistently applied that across.
But what's happening is you've got now federal money that's going into upkeep for public school, for buying the facilities and so forth, and now you've got a church does not have to buy their own. Even though it would have been tax exempt, but they don't have to buy a church building. They don't have to worry about upkeep.
Well, what case was it?
This is Good News. Good News versus, I think it was the state of New York. I could be wrong. But yes.
Well, basically they can have religious meetings, right? Not actually have church in the school,
no,
but
they
can
church.
Oh, they have church.
School.
Okay, I thought it was like religious organizations could meet at the schools.
Church in the public schools.
In about 40 minutes at Vista Ridge High School, there will be a church in the high school, just up the road from us.
Yes, and this lady wrote the book. I forget her full name, but it's called The Good News Club. Recently out. It goes through the Supreme Court decision that busted this open. But it also gave them access to the children. These public schools had pictures of their kids up, and so the church would post, oh, we're going to have, a carnival after hours, and all the kids are coming in. So the kids now have no concept that the church is separate from the school. And they got around that by saying that it was their right to have use of public facilities. It went all the way to the Supreme Court. It's happening.
But what about?
And it's a full-blown churches in the schools.
What about the Baptists that had these little kids coming for a carnival and and, you
And
know.
Oh, the old tactics where they
That
would,
just happened.
yeah.
And they
Here in
bap-
Florida Springs.
Yeah, that was it, and
Yeah,
they
they
were
baptized them.
baptized.
Baptized
Yeah.
before they went home.
Yeah.
After the
Yes.
carnival. And some of the moms took exception to that.
yeah. Yeah, imagine.
At least they got it
There
back.
was one close to us in this neighborhood.
There's all kinds of you know, stealth ways that they're trying to get into the schools. Focus on the Family publishes a special publication just for Christian teachers of how they can introduce Christianity into their classrooms without, you know, specifically violating any laws.
Well,
Yes, it is.
Because remember, the children are the wages of this war.
what do they run into the Islamists?
Well, this is Sharia law. It's only Christian.
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
It's just
absolutely.
changed. It's Sharia law. It's just changed the religion. I'm being told that there are too many people standing for me to continue. So we will continue on.
That's not what I said.
So, are there any other questions?
Well, I just want to bring up one thing. So I've taught school for 35 years, and in Texas, I was at a much more liberal, progressive school district. And we had all kinds of information that showed pros and cons for gun control, abortion, major events that take place in our society. We had pros and cons for it, and we were allowed to let our kids make the decision, debate in class, and write essays.
That's great. How long ago was that?
Yeah, you can't do that anymore. Oh my gosh, especially not in Colorado.
Or
I've been in
Texas.
Colorado
Texas,
for
yeah.
11 years.
Or Texas now.
Well,
Rick Perry, the one that he
well,
did
that's true.
remember in his debate was, yeah, I want to get rid of the Department of Education.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
what was
You
that other
remember
one?
that.
Energy. No one needs to
Because
remember.
he's educated.
So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the talk. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
And I'm here for book signing and